Okay, so this is going to be our introduction to grafting video, and just to talk about grafting a little bit. It's a pretty simple concept. It's the matching of the cambium layers of two compatible pieces of wood and effectively sealing it up so that the two can grow together. There's many kinds of grafting. There's side grafting, chip bud grafting, shiplap, whip graft, whip and tongue. Today we're going to demonstrate the simple cleft graft. So first thing before we do much demonstrating of that, we're going to talk about the knife. Okay, the knife is a single beveled. It's beveled on this side, absolutely flat on this side, and the profile of that knife is identical to a chisel. So it's flat on one side, bevel on the other, so that when it rides over the surface of the wood, it bites into the grain and cuts through it, instead of acting like a ski over the top of the blade and shaving off the bark. And if you have your knife upside down, you end up whittling. It's not effective. It's hard to make it work. So there's right-handed knives and there's left-handed knives. Make sure you get one that works for you, so that, and you know it works for you when the flat side of the blade is toward the wood and the bevel side is up. And then, okay, so the next step is, let's talk about how do you hold the knife. You know, holding the knife is pretty crucial. There's a lot of videos out there. There's people doing this. I used to teach grafting workshops where I taught people to graft like this, to cut the wood like that. And that's, you can do it. It's possible. It's very difficult. You'll never be as good a grafter if you graft like this than if you graft like this. The ideal way. Hands in front of you, knife blade facing you, the bud you're going to select to cut below facing you. Hold your hands like this. Caveman. Slice one way, flip it over, slice it another way. So you see what I've got here is a tapered cut. It's wider at the top, thinner at the bottom, but it's also thicker in the front and skinnier in the back. So that way, when it goes into my cleft, it meets here on the outside where the cambium layer is. And we talk about cambium layer. And cambium layer is really simple. It's the part of the wood that's right in between the xylem, the wood part, and the bark part. So that's it's actually the living, growing layer of cells right in between the two. It's not the outer bark, it's not the bark itself, it's the layer between the inner bark and the wood. And so so I've got this thing cut. Let's do another one. That was just pretty quick. I'm gonna do another one. I got the caveman grip. I've got the blade facing me, my bud facing me. Turn my arms like this, kind of using my body as a center, as an anvil kind of to work against. And I just, with both hands, or even keep the knife stationary. If you can keep the knife stationary and just pull the wood through, you can get a very clean, straight cut. And it's important to not wiggle that knife around. The problem with this kind of cutting, with this whittling style, is it's very difficult to not have scooping cuts and bumpy surfaces. It's impossible, virtually, to make a single cut effectively all the way through. Whereas with the caveman style, it's pretty much, you know, it sets you up to do it with one cut all the way through. You get a perfectly flat face. So pretend this stick here has roots on the other end of it, or it's a branch on the end of it, you know, on the end of a tree that you want to graft off. You cut cleanly across the top with one of these things, and then I'm going to make another cleft, another wedge, and I should speak to a few issues here. You want to be kind of quick. This is an instructional video and we're covering a lot of things. We're not being especially quick here, so I'm letting this dry out. But when you're in the actual process of grafting, you want to mess around as little as possible between the time you cut these faces and you insert them into your cleft. So here's making the cleft. I'm taking the knife, set that in the very top of the end of my stick, and I rock it gently. Use light pressure and rock it, and every time you rock it, it bites down on one edge, and it kind of slowly drops down. Oops. And that's what can happen. That's why you don't want to have your hands underneath. That's, you know, that's no good. That messes up the whole thing. But if I'd had my hands down here doing that, that would have cut right into me at that time. So I'll try again. Sometimes it's hard to cut it straight. So there's a straight. I cut it down 2 inches or so, give myself enough room so I can slide this wedge in there. So there's the wedge just set in place. I've got a bud right here, and that bud is going to want to grow, so I'm going to pick the bud out right now and make sure I tape over that so that it doesn't lose moisture. Okay, but in the just normal course of this graft, I'm securing the bottom of that split so that it doesn't run, so it doesn't keep going, and then I can put the rest of the pressure that I need to put on this thing, on this scion, and I can use my hand to feel if the stock and the scion are roughly the same size, the bark will be roughly the same thickness, and you can often just feel on the outside whether they match up fairly neatly. Sometimes if you're using a very big stock and a small scion, you have to use your eyes and really be careful. You have to look to where the interface between the xylem and the phlegm, between the bark and the wood occurs. It'll be a much thicker piece of bark it'll be very thick bark on a thicker branch and thin bark on a thin branch, and you have to line up the interface between the cambium line of both. And so that's just that, you know, that interface between the bark and the wood. And you have to make sure those match, because that's the only part of the branch that's actually growing. The rest of the tree is just basically circulation or irrigation tubing. So here we go. This is a pretty nice match. It's all set up. It's down there, pushed in tight. The bud down here is down inside the cleft. I like to do that. I'm not sure it's crucial to do that, but when you have this bud down in here, there's a lot of carbohydrate and a lot of nutrition in this area here and a lot of action. So there's faster healing that occurs in this area than in, say, this area. So I like that inside. It's nice. Not super crucial. Maybe it makes a small percentage, you know, a better growth. Okay, so as I stretch my masking tape onto this graft, I'm waterproofing and I'm tensioning at the same time. Okay, so I've got that bud. Now, okay, so there we go. I put the bud down inside the cleft, but that means I have to tape over it. Is that a bad thing? No, not really. I've got another bud right here, if you can see it on the other side of the camera. And that bud under there will be fine. It might pop out as well, but since I had that change in diameter, the tape is a little bit bunchy and wrinkled, and that's something you have to watch for. Using this method is probably I'm using common masking tape. Now, masking tape, it's not, you know, it's not grafting tape. It's not, you know, strictly speaking, the thing you're supposed to use. A lot of people use different materials. They use parafilm, they use horticultural tape, they use an asphalt mastic, electrical tape. Those all have their pluses and minuses. You know, this is really cheap. It's available. It works as well as anything, and I like it. I like it because it sloughs off by itself. You don't have to go back later and cut it loose like you do with some of the materials that people use. If you don't cut electrical tape loose, it can girdle. You can basically put a stricture or tourniquet around the growth of the branch and it'll break off after a while. So this one, masking tape breaks down on its own. You don't have to do anything about it. You just graft it and you go. So, but in order to have masking tape work, you have to be very diligent about this top edge and make sure this is baggage and wrinkle free. If there's any wrinkles or kinks or puckers in it, it'll take in water. So I've got a bud there. That's great. I'm gonna cut it off 3/4 of an inch or so. Not too close to this bud here. You cut it down at a 1/4 inch and then you're wrapping right into the bud, and it's awkward. So it doesn't matter how far above you go. You can leave 2 buds on, you can leave 3 buds on, you can leave 1 bud on, whatever. I've got a bud in here that probably will pop through the masking tape, and I've got a bud here. There's plenty. You leave too many buds on, and you end up, you know, some people will say, oh, I want 9 buds on there so that it'll make branches. Well, when you leave too many buds on, leave a lot of buds on, you basically divide the amount of push you have to any individual buds, and you reduce that the energy going into any single bud. So the fewer buds, the better, really. But if you leave just 1 bud, you run the risk of something coming along and knocking it off, like a Phoebe might land on the top here and break that off. So, do whatever you want to do. But okay, so what I've done here is I wrap this into a cylinder, push the tape together, and it's a completely waterproof cap that will break down in a year. This thing will just continue to grow. It's set to go. You don't have to shade it or anything for a deciduous graft like an apple tree or a pear tree or a plum. The buds that occur down below the graft will want to push, and in your sort of aftercare, you should be aware of that, and you should be suppressing these buds. Like if this is a baby tree, it's a new rootstock that you just grafted, you don't want to kill these buds because you need something to nurture the really minimal roots they give you on those little rootstocks. So it's a good idea to let them come out and pinch them a little bit. Just keep them below the graft section of your tree. Keep them small until this part takes off. Once this is a foot or so long, you can remove those branches at the bottom, or if you can, stay on it, just keep them small. They won't do any harm. Once they get close to the same height as the graft itself, as the bud that you want to grow, then you run the risk of them dominating and overtaking it, and they'll suppress the growth of this one in favor of the growth of the sucker you don't want.